Executives are just up to their eyeballs. What that means is we have to work just a little bit harder to make sure that we're communicating the value and show that we understand what they care about and that we can make a meaningful difference there.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight, and transactions through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. Great to be back together with everyone listening and watching this episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. The goal of this podcast is to provide provocative ideas and often actionable tips for owners and executives in the industrial manufacturing and distribution space. And I predict that today's episode may make our heads hurt a little bit and leave us with a long list of things to work on in both the short and long terms. And to help us do that, I'm joined by Elizabeth Freedman. Elizabeth is an expert in executive performance, and she's the founder of her new company called eSuite Leader. It's a leadership advisory firm that helps executives lead great teams and organizations and shows the best leaders how to get the executive suite, how to get to the executive suite and how to thrive there. Unlike traditional executive coaching and education that, often tends to emphasize leadership development, Elizabeth, through eSuite Leader, is empowering executives to excel where she argues that it matters most. That's in achieving the outstanding results, delivering the strategic impact, and building the enterprise value. In other words, my words, not Elizabeth's, I'd say kind of the pitter-patter as opposed to chitter-chatter, the results, not the theory. Now, I met Elizabeth through the Professional Speakers Association, a group that honored her several years ago with their CSP, the highest, Certified Speaking Professional, I think, the highest earned international measure of professional platform competence in the speaking profession. And that designation reflected her accomplishments as a member of the $1 Million Speaker Club. She also has shared her expertise in leadership across a number of print platforms, New York Times, Fortune Chief Executive, the Boston Globe, and the Roteman Management Journal. And she also writes a regular column on C-suite leadership for Forbes. So she certainly knows what she's talking about. I'm thrilled that she agreed to spend a little bit of time. You know what to do now. You need to share and comment and like this episode. And please join me in welcoming Elizabeth to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Ed, it is my pleasure. And I love where you started that. Look, we get to walk away with all kinds of cool actions and takeaways. But thank you for that gracious introduction.
Absolutely. So I want to start with some context. I know some consultants they see consulting as a way to have schedule flexibility and make money. Others see it as a calling to help people. And I know that you are about helping people. I mean, you started in a Peace Corp. You've been a weight loss coach. You spent 8 years helping newly minted MBAs and new professionals find their way through the perplexing workforce. I mean, even our meeting through the NSA, you were very kind and kind of mentored me in the speaking business. Where did that drive to help people come from?
Oh, I love that, Ed, and thank you, because I do feel like that's been a thread for me. If I really think about it, it's probably because I've always so deeply appreciated people that have done that for me in some way. Before you hit record, you were talking about your friend and mine, one of my former mentors, Suzanne Bates. And, it's funny, Ed, and maybe if I take you back to about 20 years ago or so,
please do.
I first started working in this business in earnest. I wound up joining a small boutique consulting firm here in Boston called Bates Communications, which focused on helping leaders communicate with their important audiences. And it was founded by Suzanne, as we mentioned, who was a former TV anchor. Now, I say all of this because you would have thought, Ed, with my background, I did a lot of work in media. I'd written a book. I did a lot of speaking, that I would have joined this firm and been like, no problem, able to help leaders and deliver a lot of value. And the truth is, I really, really struggled. And Suzanne came to me and she said, listen, you got to figure this out. And what was happening for me, Ed, is what I think happens to a lot of folks. And I know we'll get into the conversation about what it really means to work with C-suite leaders, to have to sell and influence to them. But what was happening for me at that time was like this story in my head that I think is actually quite pervasive inside organizations and companies. And I kind of liken it to, if you picture like Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz before, like Dorothy, I don't know, got her power, maybe like the first half of the Wizard of Oz, Ed, where she could not string a sentence together and, be able to have an impact with the wizard. That was me. So I say this to answer your question because I think I know what it feels like to feel like you need help,
Right.
to feel like you're struggling in that sort of type of environment. And just to kind of end that story, I wound up really, really not just struggling, I think, to be able to communicate with executives, but see myself as an equal and as a peer.
Right.
And so one day I remember meeting with a CFO, and he worked in one of those offices, like you open the elevator and like you're in the office.
Right.
It was very fancy. I think I was probably very awestruck and again, anxious. And I will never forget this, Ed, because he said to me, hey, Elizabeth, this is not Oz. I am not the wizard. Kind of divine, right? Words from him. But
Right.
also, so are you going to help me or not? And so when we talk about helping people, being driven by help, I think help can come in sort of interesting packages and in ways, but that was a huge helping moment for me. That conversation became instrumental, not only because I thought, right, like you're not the wizard. And by the way, you and I are just two professionals trying to help each other solve problems, do good work together, but also that, like, are you going to be able to help me? And really having to think about, frankly, I think I was a little defensive, like, of course I can help you. But I think appreciating that we need to sometimes be told, right, that we can help, understand what our value is and how we can help our customers and our clients. And so I think that's what I've always loved about consulting and about this work. It's being able to do that, but also myself having to really learn how to do that
Right.
in a way that adds value and can help our clients and the people we get to work with.
And it's interesting you tell that story because you were hardly an amateur. I mean, you had serious business consulting chops at that time. You'd already worked at Accenture. You'd been an MBA professor. You'd run your own consulting firm for a long time. And then I guess through 20 years with Suzanne, and then once the business was sold, as you kind of led that practice, working with companies like Disney and Intel and CVS and Under Armour and Boeing, serious companies and serious executives. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting journey you've been on. And your point about believing you belong there, not in kind of a woo-woo sort of a way, but, saying affirmations and pretending, but actually fundamentally believing it, I'm sure is something we're going to talk more about. What do you think that people most misunderstand about coaches and consultants?
I think that maybe back to the woo, that it's not grounded in really being able to drive serious business results. And I think that's why it's so important as a consultant. And I know, Ed, this is the work that you do day in and day out, right, with your clients, but really being laser focused on, like, what do you actually get paid for? What are the results you are accountable for? What is the value that you are expected to provide, that you are providing? How do we continue to do that? So I think the more coaching and consulting can link to that, the better. When it feels like it's fluffy and it's in a corner and it's not really connected to the things that leaders really are accountable for and have to deliver, it loses value quickly. And I get that. I mean, I'm the same way. It's like, look, we all have a job to do. So the work has to connect to that.
Right.
And so that's hopefully what it does do.
So you worked with senior leaders, you worked with junior leaders. You started all with a very fine liberal arts education. There's a lot of debate today about the value of that background. Sometimes parents are debating whether they should invest in it, or in the course of advising their kids whether it makes sense. Companies debate whether they need to be hiring for college degrees anymore. What's your opinion, having the benefit of retrospect and watching the way a number of organizations work right now? What's your opinion on the value of liberal arts education?
Oh God, you had to bring up my French degree, didn't you, Ed? It's funny because yes, at the time when I was in school, it was very much, I think, seen as a sort of the ultimate in education and an opportunity to get you to think and solve problems. And to some degree, it did. I will just say my experience was there was such a disconnect between that learning and I think just sort of the practical realities of the workplace, even helping me land a job. And so I think, well, certainly there's a lot we can take from that experience. If it doesn't have those elements, like I'm out. And quite honestly, I have kids. I know you're a parent, Ed. And so when I looked at even schools, colleges for both, two boys, both of them, I really paid very careful attention to the connection between what they're learning and again, that practical sort of grounding, the orientation to how we understand how this applies to the world we're in. And I think when we don't do that, we do a disservice. And so whether it's under a liberal arts umbrella or something else, if it doesn't have that, it's just a waste of time and money.
And so if you're advising a talent manager, if you're advising a CEO on the talent strategy, do you recommend that they look for those kinds of academic credentials? Do you recommend they ignore them, or is it immaterial to other factors?
Well, I'll tell you what I am seeing now is much more of a focus on skills and being able to really look at not just current and future strategy of our company. What are the skills that we need, not just for today, but for tomorrow? And then I think using that as kind of a North Star or an anchor that guides a lot of those talent decisions and discussions. I will tell you too, Ed, done a lot of work in the past around succession, particularly executive succession.
Right.
So think about, your clients, your customers where, right, we've got a CEO transition. We certainly are looking at that multidimensional picture, but it's far less about degree or credential generally.
Right.
And look, as you would imagine, much more about the breadth and depth of skills that take us to the tomorrow. And of course, that is a moving target.
Beyond just prompt writing.
You said it, my God, right? That long English essay. But yeah. And by the way, when we start to talk about, though, speaking with executives, really having impact, because I don't want to totally throw our liberal arts friends under the bus here. The truth is, some of those skills become absolutely critical at every level. And that never goes away, that ability to be succinct, distill, deliver insight, consider what's relevant, important to help drive decisions, have the kinds of dialogues we know we've got to have in order to be able to, right, land deals and grow opportunities. All of that, I think liberal arts can provide a very strong foundation. But again, we've got to see those links. So it's not like I'm just reading Shakespeare like off in the corner. I understand what to take from that so that I can bring that into the workplace.
Makes sense. Now, you've got a lot of experience across generations, and you've worked with younger people. You advise older people on working with younger people. I think probably about a year ago, the Wall Street Journal had an article that talked about how simply receiving an actual phone call can induce a physical reaction of stress among some younger folks in the workplace today. I mean, what do we do in business? How do we help bridge those gaps? I mean, even educate rising generations on how to have what we might just call a business conversation.
Yeah. I mean, it's like vastly different experiences that we see. And I think, there's this piece of what we think people should know. Well, you should know how to talk on the phone. You should know how to do these things, whatever the case may be. And the reality of what someone may have been raised in or whatever environment, the kinds of technology tools, whatever was available to them. So I think there's the school of thought that says, you meet people where they are. And I'm of that school of thought, Ed. So I think, right, recognizing the kinds of skills that our new workforce is coming in with and really being able to build that curriculum and supplement where that's appropriate. One of the things I'll just add to that, if we talk about mentoring, and you didn't raise this directly, but I think, there's so much opportunity to learn from newer generations coming in versus Why don't they know? How come they don't get it? And God knows I've said all those things too. So I'm looking at myself here, Ed. But I think really being able to appreciate what's unique, what they are bringing, and how do we better, I think, uncover that and frankly, just build that more into the fabric of the workplace because there is huge value there. I mean, it's a small example, but you mentioned me starting my business. And don't think, Ed, I'm not talking to my son every other day. This is my younger 18-year-old about social media and digital. I mean, there's just a lot to learn. And
Right.
so there's an opportunity there too.
Yeah, I was talking to, I think, a 50-year-old yesterday, pretty sure 50, solid Gen X, told me that the best way to reach them was through an Instagram DM. Not email, not phone, Instagram DM. And
Right.
I mean, if we're selling to people, if we're managing people, if we're working for teams, it's a challenge. I mean, if we think about the CEO, we know the CEO's job is to allocate resources, to guide talent, to guide strategy, to work with the board, to have a clear purpose of the organization and convey that succinctly and repeatedly till it sinks in with everybody. And I don't know how you do that with a text message or an Instagram DM, particularly at scale across an organization. I don't know how we do it without projecting our preferences onto them, but also expecting them to kind of participate in the business in a different sort of a way.
Yeah. I think the word preferences is a good one though, Ed, because I go back to even when we were working from home and trying to develop sort of hybrid work models. And there was what we knew and understood from research. And then there were the preferences of senior leadership and what they just believed or felt was important in terms of culture. Right.
Right.
And so not to dredge up, I think a lot of those discussions, but I think that continues to be, I think, something particularly for senior leaders to be aware of who are in positions to be able to drive and look, dictate the forms or channels of communication we use, the norms within our workplace. It's being able, I think, to open the aperture and also, right, as part of how we do inside companies to define our culture, educate those that come in. I mean, all the things that we know is to also indicate where, yeah, and this is where we will bend and this is where we will not. And
Right.
I think that can be part of the learning and experience of what it means to be new inside an organization. But right, these are the things sometimes I think we expect people to know. We get frustrated when they don't, we're not necessarily equipping them. And so for those that are also selling to that audience, obviously there are real implications there too.
Are you an advocate of the technique of creating for my direct reports, for instance, creating a user guide to Ed that I share with people when they work for me, so they understand how I think, what's important, what flips my switch, how to communicate with me, how to prioritize those kinds of things? Do you recommend people do that?
I do in some form, whether we call it a user's guide. I mean, in more traditional corporate settings, that new leader assimilation where we get that understanding of you. I think that's really valuable because again, there's a lot of assumption of why didn't you know or you should have known,
Right.
and so making sure that that's clear. And by the way, Ed, I would say that's certainly not a one-time exercise.
Sure.
A real common pain point I hear from clients is around, let's say, the quality of the work. So I'll often hear, Elizabeth, I've told them 50 times, this is still the level of excellence I'm getting, and it's not good enough. And so I think that can feel frustrating, understandably, but how do we continue to help people appreciate, here's the expectation, here's what good looks like, here's what I am seeing, are you now seeing what good looks like?
Right.
And that is an ongoing thing.
So what's not ongoing is your long time with Bates and the successor company. A couple months ago, you took a big leap and you went out on your own. You founded eSuite Leader. What prompted that?
I'll tell you, this has been a long time sort of interest of mine. And I think at my heart, I've always been very entrepreneurial and I've been really lucky to work for entrepreneurial companies. And, Suzanne was certainly someone I think who allowed me to really take the ball and run with it, if you will. I think, what I continued to see were some persistent challenges, areas that I knew I could be really, really helpful to senior leaders in. And so really now being able to go and look very deeply at some of those areas like not just how do we as senior leaders really run our companies day to day? Because what I was finding, Ed, in this is not unique to the kinds of consulting firms I worked for, but we know that so many senior executives step into roles and they struggle.
Right.
Because, like, let's face it, it's a hard job. And we
Sure.
know the failure rate can be high. And so we're all looking at each other saying, what's going on? We're providing coaching, we're providing development. Leaders are going to places like Harvard for a week, and still we're not seeing the kind of traction. And, as parents, I always thought this was a lot like having kids, that you can read books about having kids and people can tell you, and it's not that that's not helpful, but there's only so much you learn until you're in the seat.
Right.
And I think for me, it was being able to be that person once someone's in the seat, to be with you as a team, with you as a group of leaders, as a senior executive running an organization or a division, and being that thought partner and sounding board. And so that was really the motivation. And, I'll say one more thing, which is that for so many years getting to do this kind of work, which truly has just been the privilege of my career, but so few people get access to it, honestly, Ed. The companies I work with, to be able to have an opportunity to work with an external advisor coach, to even be part of a program where you get to dive deeply into these areas around executive leadership, it's not common.
Right.
Even though we're talking about these development programs, more often than not, it's such a small slice of leaders. And so I think my other motivation was to be able to, how do we help more leaders in the world so that more great people can step into these roles, be on boards? We want the great people leading our companies. And so much of this are just skills people can learn. And so I think that really became the driving force for me, is how do we get more of this information into more hands of more people?
Yeah, I remember one time I was on the Nom/Gov committee of a fairly significant nonprofit, and we were building out the board skills matrix. And one of the points that I tried to make was, let's look for, mid-career executives who will value the opportunity to join this nonprofit board so they can learn how boards work, learn how to view problems from that perspective, but bring the very specific skills and insights that we know that we need organizationally from a board, and everyone wins from that. So I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of value in helping those mid-career people have those opportunities.
Yeah, and especially you talk about board, so many of the leaders that I work with, they are coming towards a point in their career where they are in very significant roles. They have tons of value to bring. And so, just as where we started, I think they want to be able to bring that value and help organizations, help nonprofit, as well. And so that's just an invaluable set of skills for leaders to develop.
So we're going to start to dive deep into the meat of our discussion around how executives make decisions, how we sell to them, how to have serious business conversations. But first, just to kind of set some context to guide you as you're thinking about the answers. Many of the listeners to this show are in the industrial manufacturing space. Some are individual contributors. Many are mid and senior level managers and executives and owners and board members. What's common across them, though, is that in most cases, they kind of define their world through their product or service. And most of the marketing and sales teams focus on the technical buyer and the products. And so I really want to dig into this executive angle, how to think like the C-suite, how to understand what pushes their buttons, how to sell to them. So with that background, what I've been particularly looking forward to about this conversation is the fact that you bring really two powerful complementary perspectives. First, you've had to crack the code on how to sell to the C-suite. They're your prospects and your customers. But second, a lot of your work is helping them navigate their decision environment. And I want to start with the latter. In other words, how people are making these decisions these days. One of the things that prompted my reaching out to you a while ago was an article in the Financial Times entitled, "Have Humans Passed Peak Brain Power?" And that article presented some data. It showed that there's a measurable increase in the difficulty that adults are having in concentration and critical thought. And it kind of mirrored a lot of what I'm seeing, where people are just so overwhelmed that often important decisions just don't even get made because there's no bandwidth left. But I don't want to bias the conversation. I mean, having done so, I guess, with that preface. But how have you seen the decision-making process of senior executives evolve in your experience in recent years?
Well, I think, first of all, what you're saying certainly resonates. There's just an overwhelm. And we can point to maybe all of the sort of predictable factors,
Sure.
right? Just the convergence and the flow of information, the rate at which and pace at which it's coming at people, the back to back to back to back calendar. So, like, there's no time to think ever. And we could go on. So, that is certainly happening. And if we think about what has traditionally maybe informed decision making versus today, at least in my experience over 20 years, it's not vastly different. There are some very fundamental questions that I think, leaders are asking. They're assessing risk. They're considering, do I need this versus that? Do we have the resources? I mean, so we could go on, I think, about sort of maybe some standard questions, but I think what it always has come down to is our ability for those of us that are trying to inform and influence the decisions of senior executives is absolutely making that feel clear, compelling, obvious, easy. It may sound basic, Ed, but we really have to start there. Because when we are dealing with an audience that is under pressure, that is overwhelmed, that does not have time to think, when we come in with a lot of complexity, lots of data points, when we overwhelm with information, when we ourselves are not clear on what is it we're asking for, when we're not providing insight, I mean, all of those things, we make it harder for ourselves.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of the foundation for maybe what's going on behind the scenes when we start to think about, well, why is decision making challenging? Are they more overwhelmed? Is there a lot going on? Yes, but also we may be doing things unwittingly that are contributing to that.
So what are the common threads that you're hearing? I mean, everyone's got too much email. Everyone's got too many meetings. Everyone's concerned about now it's tariffs or geopolitical uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
But across the board, if you had to pick 4 or 5 pressures that you hear from people that they're under, what are they?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so I just think risk and uncertainty. So let's just start there. We understand that, but that has come at such a level of, look, frequency and volatility that the amount of bandwidth and mind share it has taken up, it's like, oh, let's add that to the list of the 900 other things. And so I just don't think we can underestimate how significant that is.
Yeah, are they black swans if they happen every 2 years?
Well, right. I mean, it's just immediately diverts everybody's sort of focus and attention. And so we've got that going on. I also think, and this certainly what will differ across the different, let's say, industries that your clients are engaged in, Ed, but, you think about some of those macroeconomic pressures. So I think about maybe more recently, and I too work in the industrial manufacturing space. And so, right, lots and lots of shift and engagement around sustainability, understandably. But so you think about just even something like that as a theme, given lots of ammunition and attention at one time by you in the investor space. So we have these sort of important ideas and themes, and more than themes, right? But real concerted areas that, again, divert attention. So
Right.
We've got that. There's uncertainty. There are these sort of macroeconomic issues or pressures that emerge. We've talked a lot about talent. That is huge. Talent all day long. I hear about, workforce planning. Do we have the right talent? Do we have the right pipeline of talent? Do we have talent for the future? Right capabilities? Technology would probably be the last. So this is certainly not in order of importance, but and here we go with another conversation about AI. But I mean, I think,
Well, and then cybersecurity on top of it.
well, for sure, for sure. So, when we look at surveys of what do CEOs think about and what keeps them up at night, it's certainly a lot of concern around being able to drive the kind of transformation and change rapidly enough, confidence in their ability to do that, and then their workforce's ability to do that, given some of those elements that we've been discussing. And so
those that are
I wonder-
successfully compensating, what techniques do you see them using
to
to deal with this uncertainty and this confluence of almost intractable problems?
Well, I mean, okay, so there's what's maybe not working, but certainly an attempt, which is continuing to try to stay one step ahead, stay well informed. And so I think when they've got partners that could come in and very quickly give them not just a point of view and pontificate, but action. Yes, this is what happened. This is what I would be thinking about in the next 72 hours, 2 weeks, 6 weeks. I think helping them think through that is one thing that I've seen and is effective.
Okay.
I think, to me, that ability to be then that much more discerning. So I think there's just a lot of appreciation for, look, less is more. We cannot do everything. And so I see lots and lots of meetings. I lead these meetings too with teams around, right, helping us really prioritize, focus on those 2 or 3 most meaningful things. Just got off a call, Ed, with an operations team before this conversation, spending an hour really trying to think about, out of the 20 problems we have to solve, right, what are the 2 or 3? So I think the prioritization. And the last thing I would say is scenario planning.
Tabletop kind of stuff, or just more general thinking
around scenario planning.
Yeah.
Well, I think, to me, that's very business or situation specific that I've been seeing. But I would say, and recognizing that that's just a core capability that needs to get strengthened. And so we could talk about, I think, elevating, let's say, digital literacy, AI literacy. Yes, there are things like that too. But I think that more ruthless prioritization, actionable insight that they can really sort of take to the bank right now.
Right.
And then, of course, that ability to prioritize, because, again, that flood of information and more coming every day. And so
all of this just contributes. It contributes to that tyranny of the urgent, as the saying goes. When with the CEO and senior executives, the CEO at least needs to be thinking strategically, needs to be thinking about resource allocation and what things look like 3 to 5 years. And, maybe their operations executives are more dealing with the pressing issues. But I don't think the CEO typically has latitude to think like that anymore. Everything it's happening tomorrow. It's happening next week. It's happening before the end of Q2. I mean, everyone is just responding now.
But, I think that's where we separate, right, the good from the great. It's those that are somehow able to still be the calm in the storm, underreact, I would say, appropriately, continue to help define and role model what proactive leadership looks like. So it's not always reacting and responding. Of course, sometimes we have to do that, certainly. And so I think, right, those leaders that are able to exhibit, I would say, those superpowers, even just, let's make this simple, cut through the complexity, provide actionable ideas. All those things are just like magical words right now to our leaders, because, right, otherwise it's just everybody gets caught up in a little bit of that swirl. And so to be that calm voice of reason is a huge advantage and really, really valuable to leaders.
It used to be that in sales, we would talk about the decision maker, and people still use that term, decision maker. It used to be the person who owned the P&L, who owned the consequences of their decision, who would write the check and deal with whatever happened. But now increasingly, it seems that decisions are made by committees. We've moved past, there was an intermediate stage where people solicited input from a variety of stakeholders. And now we've kind of moved past that to, in many cases, just deferring decisions, whether it's because they're overwhelmed or to avoid accountability. The statistics in complex sales are that up to 40% or more sales opportunities end in no decision, where nothing is done. How do you see executives balancing input from committees and team members versus seizing that executive decision-making responsibility and saying, for better or for worse, the buck stops with me, this is what we're doing?
Wow. I'm still kind of struck by that number, Ed. And to me, I'll tell you where I go is just, right. So therefore are these priorities. And so sometimes I think, right, even starting with affirming that, right, whatever it is that we're tasking a group with, an individual with, whatever the case may be, where does this fall on the priority ladder? And I don't know about you, but I've certainly been in situations where people look me in the eye, they swear up and down, this is a priority. Yes, Elizabeth. And then I don't hear from anyone. And so I think just recognizing, look, priorities do change quickly, whether it's an individual or a group. But I think it's important. And look, I think any good salesperson knows we've got to continue to assess, right, where this falls on their priority list. And just that, as I said, that is a moving target. So I think that's an element of this. I also think, my attitude is, and I'm not sure if this is directly answering the question, Ed, selling to a group, I've always appreciated.
Really?
Because my
I
feeling
think you're
is,
the only person I've ever heard
kidding.
say that.
And listen, I don't pretend like it's a hassle and a half, right? You're herding cats and all of the things. But the truth is that we know whatever it is that we're selling, more often than not, there's an opportunity for a lot of enterprise value, a lot of enterprise impact. And so I find if that's going to be the case, I need a bunch of people, even before this thing rolls out, launches, or starts, championing it, seeing the value in it. And so, while this isn't always the case, having a group of decision makers that have signed on for the value of this, I view as people that are now going to be advocates, people that can help me continue to sell the value of it. And so, listen, no question, there's a lot to be said for one person. You get a contract signed and you're off to the races, and that's great too. But sometimes it can be helpful to have a group of people that are right there with you, shoulder to shoulder, from the very first sales conversation.
So that's an interesting perspective, and maybe I've seen it go sideways so many times. I'm just kind of cynical and jaundiced.
Look, I've had that too. So
yeah. I keep coming back thinking about Kahneman's research, though, where he talks about essentially the outcome is that we can't be wrong if we do nothing. If we do something, particularly something that some disagree with, we've got a real challenge. If it works, we're just doing our job. It may not work because some of those who were opposed to it actually kind of work to sabotage it. Yeah. And if it just outright fails, everyone's going to recognize that, yep, I'm the one who decided, I'm the one that screwed it up. So there's this, it's not just trying to help the organization, it's avoiding all of the negative consequences that seem to come with, quote unquote, making a mistake these days.
That's right. Well, listen, there are certainly plenty of places to hide in that process.
Right.
And so I think if certainly that is the reality for a lot of us, that we are selling to those committees, then we have to just become that much more astute at setting and maintaining, I think, accountability, expectation. Again, I think these are things that good sellers do. Maybe they do just naturally,
right.
But I think putting some intention around how do we want to maintain that? And listen, in practice, sometimes that looks like many, many more meetings, phone calls, one-on-one, all the things we do to keep a group of stakeholders aligned. And again, I guess keep them here, but really keep them there throughout that journey. Not easy.
I would contend that there's been a decline in both organizational and societal accountability. I don't know, maybe it's just me being a Gen X, having that sarcastic perspective and coming from the military, or maybe it's actually the corporate equivalent of gentle parenting. Where companies are afraid of employees, worried about how somebody might write about them on Glassdoor. Do you get the sense in conversations that there's a concern about and not making sure that we're taking care of our employees? We want their opinion so we know that we're taking care of them, but more just kind of this worry that they might not like us?
Oh my gosh. It's funny you're saying this, Ed, as a Gen Xer too. I hear about this all day long. Or maybe I'm hearing what I want to hear sort of thing, but just consistent, persistent challenges around how do I create that sort of shared ownership and accountability. What's interesting is the different forms, I suppose, that takes. So for example, think about an executive team. I was meeting with a team maybe a month ago, and the mutual accountability was not there. And so you had leaders, and we see this all the time inside companies, who are thinking like owners, who are thinking about the enterprise first. And then we have some that say, what does this mean to me? And I got to worry about my function or my area.
Sure.
Companies that have multiple sites and it's every site for themselves and
Right.
we can go on. So some of this is kind of, I think, structurally how we want to set up our organizations and how much we want to empower. So we're seeing, I think, accountability for what's best for the company. And so but that exists at every level. But I think it certainly starts at the top. And along those lines, Ed, I think helping people, just going back to like, yeah, here's how you talk on a phone and here's why you have to do that. Here's what enterprise thinking and enterprise mindset looks like at this company, at these different levels, and how it gets applied in these day-to-day contexts. So we can really start to see clearly, yeah, I'm really not thinking about the company right now. And how do I start to shift that? And it gives us, I think, a way to get at accountability that may be a little more practical,
right,
and frankly helpful for leaders that are trying to instill that.
All right, so let's shift to the sales side of it. You sold to the C-suite for years. What
Still
do you
do, Ed. Still do. That never goes away, right?
What do you think are the keys to success there?
I love this question because we could talk all about techniques and strategy. And Ed, I think at the end of the day, it's the be good strategy. Just really try to do a good job for your client. And I mean, I don't mean to gloss over, or I know there's certainly a lot under the hood, but I think I felt and still feel just, true gratitude if someone entrusts any aspect of their work, their leadership with me. I want to really, really try to hit it out of the park. And so what does that mean? I mean, all the things that, hopefully good professionals know and do, but I think underneath it, I wanted them to know I understood what mattered to them and had a way to help them get that.
So once you're in the middle of the sales process or delivering in your case, your service, I see how that fits, but how do you prospect to them? I mean, they don't have time for everything they need to do, much less consider taking on something new that's not on their priority list and isn't resourced. How do you prospect in that situation? Is it only by referral?
Yeah, well, certainly referral is important in this business. And I would say certainly, anyone selling to the C-suite, referral has to be part of that strategy. There's no question. Look, there are the other things that we do to try to generate warm leads. I won't go into all the details, but I think the thought leadership, the marketing, the branding, those activities are important. And so people know, like, yeah, you're actually giving examples that suggest you do know what you're talking about. You have worked with people like me. So we know we have to be able to do that too.
Right.
I think the way that we understand what matters to our clients, so back to that idea, how do they know that you know what matters to them?
Okay.
How do you want to convey that? And so I think the prospecting, right out of the gate, we've got to be able to demonstrate an understanding there. And that doesn't mean we have to be perfect. Go back to my earlier example of, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz and that story about everything's got to be absolutely perfect. And God forbid we get asked a question we don't know the answer to, and a lot of that noise that can interfere with our effectiveness. And I think it's, taking that time, simple though it is, to apply a concept we've talked a lot about over the years, the different firms I've worked with, called 180 thinking. Nothing fancy. It is really just trying to deeply understand, what are our clients trying to accomplish?
Right.
How have they been approaching that? Asking all of those smart, thoughtful questions, and then letting our, not just understanding of that, but being able to bring some depth and insight to how we would support that in very clear, succinct, simple ways. We go back to that overwhelmed audience. Now, every market, every kind of environment, that's going to look a little different. Is it that email outreach? Is it a warm introduction and an initial 30-minute discovery? Is it another form? We can talk about how that applies, but I think that kind of mindset and getting as sharp in that area as you can already is going to put you ahead of like 99% of other people.
So I often talk with companies about how they can differentiate themselves, not by their product or service, but rather by how they sell. And that sounds like what you're saying.
Yes. Yet that dialogue,
Right.
And I think being able to come in and, as you know, it's the non-selling sales strategy that I think is very important. It's all those behaviors. Again, I'm listening. I have curiosity. I'm asking thoughtful questions. I've done interesting research, which doesn't mean I have to be an expert in all things you and your business, but I have a thoughtful perspective and
Right.
point of view, all those things.
Is there
And
still
that's a huge differentiator, I would agree.
is there still a place for golf for lunch in selling to the C-suite, or are relationships important?
Well, yes, although it's funny, I haven't seen as much of that, certainly in the beginning. What's interesting is I have seen clients do incredible things with clients, golf events, travel, breakfasts, and those can all be, I think, wonderful elements. But to me, that's a step two or a step three.
Right.
Step one is show you understand what matters to them and help them get it, deliver value, and be able to, I think, as I like to say, do they value that value? Right? Continue to affirm that what you're doing is providing something that's meaningful and important to them, so they don't just buy from you once, but they continue to. But I think that those first months are just everything to me, Ed. It's got to feel seamless.
Right.
We know how hard it is to get a client in the door, and so the onboarding, those initial discussions, all those first things, I would say we're still selling. Maybe that contract got signed, but no.
Well, I mean, certainly there still is a lot of potential buyer's remorse, and not because they really think they made a mistake, just because, geez, what if I made a mistake?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And I mean, they're trusting us with big stuff.
Right.
And so there's a lot on the line. And so I think just really feeling that every touch point, every interaction, whether we're selling or whether we're delivering, that feeling of you get it
Right.
is just front and center to them.
All right. So let's talk a little bit kind of around a scenario. Oftentimes, the folks listening to this may be selling capital equipment. So let's say they're selling a $500,000 solution to a company that's anywhere, could be $25 million to $10 billion. But in any event, $500,000 is going to be material.
Yeah.
But much more than the $500,000 is that often these have the potential to substantially disrupt production and operations. So it's a much bigger risk in terms of if you shut the factory down for 3 days because you make a mistake, the $500,000 is going to be, chicken feed compared to that. The other part of what goes on is that the people kind of conducting the process are often local technical people, like the plant engineer, for instance. And they're having conversations that tend to be very comfortable for the salespeople because they're talking about those technical features that are kind of the default for many salespeople. The problem is that this completely misses the folks that are involved and make the decisions about whether or not capital is going to get requested, much less whether capital is going to get allocated. So how does somebody bridge those conversations? How does a sales rep who's comfortable speaking with the maintenance manager, the plant engineer, the plant manager, also be comfortable speaking to the regional VP, the CEO, the CFO, and have the appropriate conversation in both cases?
Yeah. I mean, I think you sort of said it, Ed. We've got different audiences. And so, I get really practical, like, right, who are those different audiences and how do we have to think about each of them? And so I think having, even if it's a simple game plan, but a game plan is key. And, there's pregame, there's the game, and there's postgame. So I think there's different elements along the way, but at each, back to this fundamental understanding of what's driving that group, what's important to them, what are going to be the important questions they would ask, what are they not going to ask, but really be thinking. I mean, this is part of that pre-game, pre-work that we're doing. And there's no—
You mean buyers don't ask or say everything that's going through their minds?
For sure, right? I mean, and I think to be, just as we said, that ability to be proactive. I mean, one of the things that I like to do and recommend to people, it's kind of the setting the table activity. Imagine you go in, you're setting the table. What's involved there? Well, what's involved in part is all of those concerns and objections that they're going to have, and we know good old fashioned objection handling, but really to be able to identify how would they articulate that objection? What's our thoughtful response? Well, it's like, we're going to shut down the factory for 3 days or whatever on the floor. Are you kidding me? And so how do we want to be thoughtful there? But I think back to that idea of 180 thinking, really deeply understanding your audience. Because we all know if you go in, right, you speak French to the people that speak French and you speak Spanish to the people that speak Spanish. And so we must be able to speak in their language. And that's just got to be an expectation or a skill. And it's perfectly okay to know about yourself. I'm a little more comfortable or fluent in this language. Fine. Now we get to learn the other language too.
Right.
And that's just a set of skills and behaviors and repetition.
And it feels like the hardest part is to simplify it for the C-suite, because I think the way many people think about the decision, there's increasing understanding of complexity as you move up. And so they want to provide the entire story as, instead of almost going the opposite direction, deal with all the complexity at the operational level, and at the business decision level say, hey, you've got this very clear objective. You need to do this. This is how it helps you do that. And this is why, why it's the right decision.
100%. I mean, even just understanding, I think, what would be the criteria exactly by which, they would be making a decision, vastly different. That ability, I think, to show up as a peer, that may look less informal, that may certainly look like fewer words, but it's an entirely different set of things typically that we see that audience cares about. And so to go in with that level of detail, asking the kinds of questions you would ask maybe to audience A versus your executive audience, over talking, right? Detailed slides, asking questions that, again, would not be appropriate for that audience.
Right.
We could go on, but we can't carry that same stuff into that. And so exactly as you illustrate, it's got to be that sort of direct to the point, but through the lens of, I understand what it sounds like you really care about here. With that, I think, sort of in the back of our mind, we can be so much more effective.
And for many salespeople, their biggest concern is pissing off their lower level contacts. Why are you going around me? This is my project.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, this seems to be just like the thing in every industry. It's like, nah, I can't. And so I think we've got to really, really be able to, I think, have a strong response to that. And that may be anything from, listen, you and I both know that this is an individual who's ultimately going to be, accountable for a responsible. We've got to bring this person into the discussion. Help me figure out a way to do that. Love you to be part of that conversation. In my world, Ed, I'm asked to lead a lot of executive team meetings. I will not do it unless I speak with the CEO or whoever is running that team. Even if it's the president saying, no, this CEO wants me to, I understand that, but this is the individual ultimately accountable and responsible for leading the team. I want to make sure this is aligned and obviously serving them. So we all have to have that kind of language and response in our back pocket. But if we get caught in I don't want to make them mad, not only does that hurt our business, but it's so counter to exactly who we need to be. And there's what we say, there's the practices, but there's sort of an identity shift to, Ed, that I think comes along with really being able to be effective at that C-suite. And so if we're still caught up in that, I don't want them to be mad, that's kind of our old identity.
Back when you stepped out of the elevator into the big lobby and the CFO had to tighten you up.
Totally. 100% versus, wait a minute, I'm here to try to support this business in this way. Here's what it takes to do that. Here are the conversations I'm going to need to have and so on. That's right.
You've been selling to the C-suite for a long time. You're really good at it, but we all lose deals sometimes. What's the most common reason you lose deals?
Oh, God, I love that question. The most common reason they didn't want to do it in the first place. And so I'm sort of talking out of both sides of my mouth here, Ed. Here's a recent example. Head of HR at a company said, I want you to work with the CEO. Now, I have learned, Ed, over the years that even if I want to say, yes, let's do it, sounds great, I have to, take my own medicine here, do the same things of, tell me why this CEO believes they want to do this work.
Right.
Like, convince me this is something they want to do. And sure enough, when I got on the call with the CEO, his response was, yeah, I don't understand why we're talking about this.
Wow.
I didn't want to do this. And so that happens more often than you think. And so that's certainly one reason. And so that's on me, right? I think, qualify those opportunities, save them time, save you time too.
Right. You got a lot going on between launching a new business. You've got kids launching into their lives. You got all these competing priorities. How do you manage your own stress?
I'll tell you one of the things I've done recently, Ed, I bought one of those like weighted vests and I go on walks. And I had a coach once who said, take your problem on a walk, tell the walk you need to solve the problem. And I'm sure I look crazy because there I am walking up and down these like walking trails, with the weighted vest, talking out loud, Ed. Yes, I do that about how do I want to think about this or what would I say here? But, I find like that's important. Getting outside. Someone said to me, you know what? You need to be outdoors and have an outdoor hobby for every season of the year. And I always thought that was good advice. And so I really tried to take it, getting out, going on those walks. That's certainly been one thing.
So you're not listening to podcasts or music. You're talking through problems?
I'm listening to this podcast. Oh, no, I do both. I do. I listen to podcasts.
What speed do you listen at?
But you know what, Ed? I think back to this overwhelm. I mean, I feel it too. And so I got to a point where I'm like, I don't want to hear any more ideas or advice. I need to just do what I know.
Right.
Right. Let's act on what we know, and also listening to the own inner voice. And so I think that's just been really, really helpful.
One thing I've noticed, you post frequently, but you're quite private about personal interests and activities. So most people seem to hang out all their laundry these days. And in contrast, I don't see you talking about anything personal, no reference to your dog. There was one, you had a post recently with your dad, I think, at your wedding.
Yes.
But outside of that, there's not much. Is that a conscious choice or is that just who you are?
This is funny, Ed. Someone else said that to me. And I think what I'm hearing is like, maybe that wouldn't be like such a bad idea. I think this goes back to maybe something like, well, I'm just here to talk about work. And, why would that matter to people? But I mean, my God, I know it's so important to understand not just who you are sort of professionally, but who you are as a person.
Right.
And so probably have some work to do in that area, quite honestly. Could do a little more there.
What's a business decision that you made along the way that you were really worried at the time was a mistake, but turned out to be brilliant?
I think the ones that come to mind, Ed, are when, particularly in the moment doing the work. And, you feel sorry for the teams that I would drag into my work projects, Ed, because we would have a game plan. We would know what we were going to do. And sometimes these are high stakes, highly visible types of projects. And I would walk in to the client meeting and I would look at my team and say, we're not doing that. I said, I think this is really the conversation we want to help them have. And I've had a few times where people have said, like, I can't believe you're changing it. And I don't know if this is right. But I think I do trust my instincts there. And so I've tried to just listen to that and not overthink stuff. I think, you can talk yourself out of anything.
Right.
But I think when I'm able to listen to that usually works out for me.
And in all your conversations with the C-suite these days, what are you hearing most that they're getting from the board that's counterproductive?
I think the board wants to move fast. The board will say things. And look, I just came out of a situation recently where chairman of the board pulled the CFO aside and said, hey, please help us help your CEO make decisions faster. And, that was kind of an interesting moment that, on the one hand, sort of trying to do a bit of a workaround and chairman's trying to bring the CFO in. to advance their agenda or view. But I thought it also, to me, showed, do we understand the gravity of some of these decisions and what it must be like to be that CEO and really have to weigh, this is not just, something we make quickly. And so I think giving that CEO the space, frankly, to not be rushed. Obviously, there's a happy medium in
Sure.
there.
Right.
But so I think that kind of, I don't know, temperature around, hey, we got to move fast, sense of urgency is sometimes can look different. And, there's only one person that's sitting in that seat ultimately.
Right.
So that can be tough.
Shifting gears a little bit, many of the folks that are listening and watching this podcast actually run their own companies, and they face many of the same challenges in their everyday work that we've highlighted that their prospects face. So we want to help their sales teams overcome. So how would somebody who's listening know if they're a potential fit for your advisory or coaching?
Well, one of the things I would say is certainly if you work or with or have to sell to an executive audience on a regular basis, that's always, a good conversation for us to have. But I also spend a lot of time, Ed, with leaders that just know they want to increase their impact with that audience. One of the things I'm doing right now is I'm teaching an 8-week accelerated course. There's coaching, there's masterclass, but the purpose of that is really to help people that know they want to increase their impact, particularly by looking at how they're able to sort of produce results and also how they're able to grow and build trust with their executives. So I think there's lots of ways that leaders who are interested in this work can get support. Certainly, I love working with leaders that are always trying to kind of elevate and up their game in those areas.
And is there a particular size or industry of the companies that you work with?
So I tend to work with a lot of medium-sized companies to larger size. So companies usually under, let's say, I don't know, $1 billion in revenue typically aren't reaching out to me. That said, I've got a couple of smaller companies that I work with, but a lot of my clients, again, they work in, I would say, manufacturing, technical, also a lot of pharmaceutical clients on different sides of that equation. But I'm pretty industry agnostic. What's more important is that thread of needing to really have to grow and sell their business with that audience. Yeah.
So periods of turmoil are often opportunities for step change and growth for companies that can figure out how to leverage them. Do you have any particular advice based on what you're hearing and seeing for business leaders about how to scan for opportunities and how to position themselves to seize them?
Well, I mean, certainly if I think about your audience, and no doubt they're already on top of this, Ed, but I think really how are tariffs going to affect our clients? And,
Or our competition?
Thank you. That's absolutely right. And so being able to spend a little bit of time and have a thoughtful point of view, but more importantly, like what would we do if we had to help our clients tomorrow? Where would we help them begin? What would we want them to be looking at? And so I would say, if nothing else, being able to use that, not in a, I don't know, I hate to use the word opportunistic because if this is causing pain for our clients, we don't want that. But I think.
But if you go back to the idea that you're helping them, then if they're in pain, they need help.
That's right. And I would also say, right, we never lose sight of the fundamentals, right? We know our business, we know we can help our clients. And rather than, well, they won't buy or this is going to be hard, I often say, right, it's just a puzzle. We just have to figure out how. And so I think helping to build that kind of puzzle mindset individually on our teams is just such an important exercise for companies. So we have the kind of willingness to keep learning and trying, experimenting, and just tell ourselves, of course it can work. We just figure out where does this puzzle piece go and take that approach.
Makes sense. You've got a newsletter that people can sign up for. What other resources do you recommend for further insight into selling to executives or understanding how business decisions are made? Are there blogs you recommend or books or YouTube channels or podcasts or anything?
Well, thank you, Ed. Yes, you can certainly check out the website because eSuiteleader.com, one of the things on there in addition to the newsletter is a playbook. And it's about 25 pages. And it goes into some detail just about, right, what's helpful to know and understand about working with and being part of an executive team or an executive suite. So I always like to recommend people go there. I write a lot for Forbes. If you just Google my name, you're going to see lots of ideas and articles about that. But the other thing that I recommend is right, really starting to become a student of what good executive communication looks like. Because the fact is, so many of those fundamentals and practices become, I mean, there's just, we can never sort of arrive there. We can all continue to grow and develop. And so I would be remiss if I did not talk about Suzanne Bates's book, Speak Like a CEO. I think that's an excellent one that just focuses on a lot of those good practices around how we communicate with the executive suite. I will tell you, I certainly love, a good sales read. But, I find myself drawn more to the books, Ed, honestly, about, I'll say, human behavior, about just how we interact with each other as leaders. And so I think I recommend, continuing to read the books that give you insight into how people really are,
Right.
which made me less leadershipy. I'm a big fan of, the Mel Robbins Let Them book. I think that's a really nice, practical one. So I think things like that are helpful. At the last point, I'll say, um, you know, I don't know how many of your listeners are Shark Tank people. I never watched an episode of Shark Tank in my life. I have to tell you though, I don't know, something happened and I went down the YouTube rabbit hole, and what an excellent sort of just opportunity to see the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to really being able to be effective, make your point, and influence a pretty tough audience. And so I think having just kind of a breadth of tools and information, but so much of this is skill.
Right.
And so putting yourself in rooms where you can build that skill, working with people like you, I mean, that's really, I think, the key.
All right. I'll drop your website link in the show notes, but how do people connect with you?
Yeah, I think certainly going to the website, you can always book a one-on-one call if you're interested in more. I am on LinkedIn, and it's Elizabeth at eSuiteleader.com. Reach out anytime.
Cool. So wrap us up. 2 minutes on how executive decision-making is changing, the pressures on the C-suite, and what that means we need to really understand about selling to them.
So I think executives are just up to their eyeballs. They always have been, but now let's just 10x that. And so what that means is not that they're not going to be able to make a decision. What that means is, right, it's just we have to work just a little bit harder to make sure that we're communicating the value, that we are succinct, that we are crisp, and that we really figure out how to get very, very good at that. And, we can be succinct and crisp, we can get on their radar, but if we're not conveying that we understand what matters to them, that we can solve their problems, right? We haven't necessarily brought that over the finish line. So I think those are the combination of elements. Underneath it all, we have to care about what they care about and show that we understand what they care about and that we can make a meaningful difference there. And, just do it in, a couple of sentences, Ed. We can do that. We're in excellent shape, or even if we could come close to that, hey, we're so far ahead of the game.
Well, that may be the best use for ChatGPT then, to try to take these complex ideas, build a custom GPT with the persona of the C-suite you're selling to, and then say, okay, take this 3-page thing and put it in 3 sentences for me to make an impression.
Got it. That's right. Having all of that, like sort of, talk track toolkit,
right,
as I like to call it, and ChatGPT can be your best friend there for sure.
All right. This has been a really thought-provoking conversation. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
And thank you so much. My pleasure.
All right. So Elizabeth has done her part sharing all these insights. Now I ask everyone listening and watching, do your part. Drop a comment on what you found particularly insightful. Give the episode a like. Share it with somebody who you think will benefit. And thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast.